Hey, today let's revisit the Quaverato by Zeppelin Design Labs and talk about harmonic tremolo. So it's been a while since we looked at and built the Quaverato by Zeppelin Design Labs, and that's pretty much because I really wanted to put some effort into this video and explain what harmonic tremolo is. I know it's an effect a lot of people don't use and maybe don't quite understand, so I wanted to make sure I was well prepared to explain everything you could get out of this pedal. With that, I guess the best place to start is to talk about tremolo. Okay, so I've got my Strat in my hand, and I think this is the easiest way to talk about or introduce somebody to tremolo so they can understand what's going on. Tremolo is amplitude modulation. That means I can essentially create tremolo by just taking my volume knob on my Strat and spinning it up and down at a specific rate. That's the easiest way to explain tremolo. Obviously you could use an amp or a pedal or anything that has a volume, but that's what's going on. Tremolo is often confused with vibrato, which is why I have my Strat in my hand. Vibrato is if I had my whammy bar and I was changing pitch, that would be vibrato. Tremolo, amplitude, vibrato, pitch. So back to the Quaverato. This is marketed as a harmonic tremolo pedal, but it can function as just a standard tremolo pedal as well. That's done by hitting this phase switch here and saying in phase. I'll get to what in and out of phase mean, but essentially if it's in phase, you're gonna get just standard tremolo. You'll also see some pretty common knobs with tremolo pedals like depth and rate and volume. There's a couple other options in here too. Again, I'll get to that a little bit later, but first I just wanted to say this pedal, although marketed as a harmonic tremolo pedal, will just work as a generic tremolo pedal as well. So the first knob we're gonna look at is the depth knob. So the depth knob controls how much of the signal is going to be cut when you increase it or decrease it. So back to my analogy with the Stratocaster, if I'm going to go from 10 on my Stratocaster down to 8, that's a very low depth. But if I go 10 to 0, it's going to be a high depth. So the greater the depth, the greater the drop in volume. So the second knob I want to talk about is the rate knob. So the rate knob is essentially exactly how it sounds, how fast I'm going to that high peak to my low trough in my depth. So the rate or the frequency at which it's changing, if I take it back to my Stratocaster analogy, is how fast I'm twisting the volume knob. Now you can adjust the rate with the rate knob on the Quaverato, or you can use their built-in tap tempo. Tap tempo is essentially what it sounds like. You tap in the tempo with your foot stomp switch, and then you also have the option to adjust it by using the multiplier up here. The multiplier will go to about a half all the way to 4 times what you tap in. The next knob I want to talk about is the spacing knob. This is a knob that doesn't commonly show up on tremolo pedals because it's more to do with the duty cycle of the effect than the rate. So there's two closely connected parts of the effect, a rate and spacing, but they are quite different. Rate is the frequency at which something changes. Spacing is how often it changes or what percentage of that cycle is high versus low. I'll try to put up some images on this, and I think you've been seeing them along the way, but hopefully this will give you a little bit more information and help you decipher the difference between spacing and rate. For the Quaverato, if you turn the spacing all the way up, you're going to get more on time with your effect, whereas if you turn it all the way down, you're going to get more off time. I read through the manual. I didn't see if they actually say it goes to 0 duty cycle to 100 duty cycle, or if there's some ratio in there that reaches the minimum and the maximum. So the next thing I need to talk about is the wave shape. This should be pretty straightforward if you actually just look at the images on the pedal, but nonetheless, I can use my Stratocaster analogy to give you an idea of how tremolo shapes can differ. One being, if I turn the volume up very slow and then turn it down fast, that's going to be a different shape than if I turn it up as slow as I turn it down. So this can range anywhere from sinusoidal to 2 different types of sawtooth to a triangular waveform, and finally a square wave, or what some people would call a chop. This is where your volume goes max holds for a period of time, and then goes to 0 instantly. So now that we've looked at the 5 controls that affect any general tremolo, let's talk a little bit about harmonic tremolo. Harmonic tremolo is when the input signal is separated into high frequency and low frequency parts. The changes that we saw from these first 5 knobs are then applied to those frequency sets separately and out of phase. On the Quaverato, all you need to do to engage harmonic tremolo is turn the phase switch to out of phase. So with harmonic tremolo, you're actually going to have the option to use the Harmonic Mix Knob as well. What this does is it allows you to adjust how much of that tremolo effect is going to be applied to the low frequency portion of your signal and how much of that effect is going to be applied to the high frequency portion of the signal. If you turn it all the way up, it's pretty much going to just affect the high frequency. If you turn it all the way down, it's just going to affect the low frequencies. While we're talking about the high frequency part of the signal and the low frequency part of the signal, I wanted to quickly open it up and show you how those are determined. It's actually a user setting by these dip switches in here, and it allows you to set the cutoff frequency for your high pass filter and the cutoff frequency for your low pass filter. So they do give you some guidance in the documentation and on their website, on their video, on how you can set these, but really it's to a player's choice. One thing to keep note of is if your low pass filter's cutoff frequency is set really low and your high pass filter's cutoff frequency is set quite high, you're going to lose a lot of the mid portion of your signal. Switching back to the outside, we have 2 things that I haven't talked about yet. One is the volume knob. So internally, you set the gain for the Quaverato using this small resistor here. What that does is essentially sets an overall gain for the pedal. This volume then allows you to increase the volume, which essentially increases the gain of the input signal. One thing to note is if you have this jacked up all the way internally, you can get about 15 dBs of gain. Lastly, you have another toggle switch here, which allows you to switch the bypass from a momentary switch to a toggle switch. So that means that if I have it set to toggle, it's going to work like any regular foot stomp where I click it, the red light goes on, and it stays on until I click it again. If I set it to momentary or MOM period, what they have written down here, it's only going to be on when I depress the foot stomp labeled bypass. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about these 2 resistors here, which set the ratio for your low pass and high pass filters. Essentially by adjusting these, depending on if you adjust one or the other or both, you can either brighten the output signal of your pedal or darken it. So with that, let's plug this in, see what it sounds like, and see if I can show you what is harmonic tremolo and what these different knobs do to the effect. So I'm all set up and ready to give you guys some sounds from the Quaverato. Right now I have it set just in the in-phase mode, so it's going to act like a standard tremolo pedal. A couple notes on the internal settings. I have my low pass filter cutoff frequency set to 500 Hertz and my high pass filter cutoff frequency set to 722 Hertz. It's a little bit different than the suggested ones in the documentation. A little bit more wobble, but not so much that it's going to give you that seasick feeling. I played around with it a little bit, and these were just the settings I came to. Additionally, the gain, the internal gain that I've set is a little bit below unity when the volume is at noon. That's just because I don't want to introduce any extra distortion. I've got overdrive and distortion pedals for that. Lastly, before we get started, you'll notice I've got a red knob on my volume potentiometer. That's just to indicate to you folks that I've actually went back into my Quaverato and swapped out that volume potentiometer from a 100K linear pot to a 100K logarithmic pot. This is just personal preference for me. I like logarithmic pots for your volume just because I find they give you a little bit better indication of where you actually sit based on how we hear. If you are at 12 o'clock with a logarithmic pot, that means you are halfway. If you are, 3/4 of the way through, you're 3/4 of the way through. It's just a little bit better indicator than the linear pots for me. So with that, I'm going to turn up my Strat that I have here, and we're going to go through the settings for the standard tremolo, and then after that we'll introduce the harmonic tremolo and see if you guys can see the differences. So to begin, we are set at a square wave. The spacing is at 12 o'clock, as is the rate, and we're going to go ahead and turn up the guitar and turn up the depth on this one. So we'll start with the, actually let's start at the depth of 0, and you can see that this is just going to act more like a boost than anything else. Okay, let's turn up the depth knob to 50%. And you can already hear the noise that's coming through on my amp, having the tremolo effect. And the depth all the way up. So this will be a very choppy sound because it's going to go between full signal and 0. Okay, we'll go back to 50% on the depth, and let's play around with the rate. So let's slow down the rate, and here we go. So again, this is just your standard tremolo effect, nothing harmonic tremolo about this yet. We're going to turn up our rate almost all the way. You can see the green LED is now flicking intensely, and let's go ahead. Big fan of that choppy, fast sound there. So let's dial back the rate here, because I want to next look at spacing. So remember, spacing was the amount of on time versus off time. So if we turn up the depth, and a square wave is really good to show this, let's turn the spacing almost all the way down, and you should hear that it is off much more than it is on. Pretty self-explanatory there. Let's turn the spacing up. Spacing is going to be on a lot more than it is off. Okay, so let's just quickly go over the wave shapes. I'm going to back this off to a sinusoidal shape. We've got the depth at about, say a little over half, rate a little over half, and let's put the spacing back to 50%. Okay, let's move it up to the first sawtooth. So this should be a fast rise and then a slow decrease. Okay, and the other sawtooth, which is it's the opposite of the other one. It is a slow rise and a fast decrease. I'll be honest, I really can't tell the difference there. Let's go to triangle wave, which is the only one we haven't had yet. Just a little bit more of a choppy sinusoidal, I guess. So I don't know if we really need to get into the tap tempo, but I will again just go over this multiplier. I have this set at 1:1, so whatever the tap that would come in is what would stay. If I turned this up, I could get it 4 times the speed, and if I turned it down, I could get it to as low as 1/2 the speed. The other options are speed, 150%, 200%, 300%. Again, tap tempo is pretty straightforward. It is exactly what it sounds like. A little hard for me to step on this the way I have it oriented now. So you'll just have to take my word that the tap tempo works on this, and it works with the multiplier knob here. So at this point, I want to flick the phase to out of phase to get this harmonic tremolo. We'll turn the guitar back up. Let's keep it, actually let's move it to sinusoidal and see what we can get. I'm going to turn up the depth on that and turn up the rate just a little bit. And remember, all this is with the harmonic mix set to about 50%. If I'm going to just do a quick comparison, I'll flip this back to regular tremolo, play those same chords. So not as much of a phasing effect, we'll say, when you're in phase as opposed to out of phase. So let's check out the harmonic mix knob at this point. I've got it set at 50%. Here's what it sounds like. If I turn it all the way down, it's going to affect my low frequency batch, so anything under 500 hertz in my case. So that's a good one to hear there. I don't know if you can hear it on the recording, but for me, you can definitely hear those high frequencies not really being attenuated at all. Definitely interesting. We should hear the opposite if I turn this all the way up. And I'll try not to lose focus of my pedal here. Okay, so we've been through most of the functions on this one. Last thing I'll show you is just how much the gain can increase. Again, we probably don't need to go through the bypass, how that's set with momentary or toggle. Just know, I guess I can show you quickly. If I turn this to momentary, and toggle. So with the toggle, obviously you're going to act like a standard pedal. With momentary, it's only going to be on when you depress that foot switch. So let's check out the gain. Gain's almost at 100%. Let's take a look. Okay, let's take the harmonic mix back to 50 and give it another shot here. So that's the Quaverato by Zeppelin Design Labs. Really fully featured harmonic tremolo pedal. I hope you guys were able to see some of those effects in my earlier portion of the video and as I ran through all these knobs here. Yeah, it's a really great offering by Zeppelin Design Labs and I highly recommend it. So I hope you guys liked that review of the Quaverato by Zeppelin Design Labs. I hope I was also to give you guys some insight on harmonic tremolo and what it is. If you have any questions, definitely hit me up in the comments below. I'm sure I could have explained some stuff better. Other than that, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.